In 1848, a 3-foot iron rod shot completely through a man's skull at roughly the speed of a rifle bullet, entering under his left cheekbone and blasting out through the top of his head. He did not die. He did not even fall unconscious for long. Within minutes, he was sitting up, talking, and asking someone to fetch a doctor, as if he had merely cut his hand. He rode in an ox cart into town with a hole clean through his brain and lived for 12 more years. But the strangest part of this story is not the wound itself. It is what the wound revealed. The first hard proof in the history of medicine that your personality is not some fixed, untouchable soul, but wiring that can be physically blown apart. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how one iron rod rewrote science's entire idea of the human mind. It happened on September 13th in Cavendish, Vermont. Phineas Gage was 25, a foreman for the Rutland and Burlington Railroad, well-liked and known for being meticulous and level-headed. His job that afternoon was routine: pack blasting powder into a drilled hole with a tamping iron, then let his crew light the fuse. But someone forgot to add sand as a buffer. When Gage's iron struck rock instead of powder, it sparked. The explosion sent his own tamping rod, 3 feet 7 inches long and 13¼ pounds, rocketing upward through his face, his skull, and his brain. It landed 80 feet away, smeared with blood and tissue. His crew ran to him expecting a corpse. Instead, they found Gage conscious, sitting in the dirt, calmly describing what had just happened to his own head, as railroad workers around him stood frozen in disbelief. What happened next should have been physically impossible. Gage was loaded into an ox cart and driven into town, sitting upright the entire way. Dr. John Martin Harlow arrived to find a man calmly waiting on a hotel porch, joking that there was plenty of work for the doctor now. Harlow cleaned the wound, removed bone fragments, and literally held pieces of skull together with his fingers. Infection set in within days, and Gage slipped into a fever so severe his family prepared a coffin. Then, against every expectation, he recovered. 10 weeks after a rod had passed through his frontal lobe, Phineas Gage walked out of that house alive, largely able to see, speak, walk, and remember his entire life before the accident. Physically, he looked almost like a medical miracle. But the people who had known him before were about to notice something was deeply, unsettlingly different. Gage's body had healed, but his friends said the man they knew was gone. Before the accident, he was famously disciplined, described by employers as their most efficient and capable foreman. After it, Dr. Harlow wrote that Gage had become fitful, irreverent, and impatient of restraint, using the grossest profanity, showing little deference to others, and unable to stick to any plan he made. His friends said, simply, he was no longer Gage. This was staggering to 19th century science. At the time, most doctors believed the brain worked as one unified organ, and that a soul or character existed somewhere separate from raw biology. Gage's case suggested something radical instead, that morality, patience, and judgment could live in specific folds of tissue, and that damaging the right few cubic centimeters could erase a personality while leaving intelligence and memory almost completely intact. Unable to hold his old railroad job, Gage's life became a strange second act. For a time, he displayed himself and the very rod that had impaled him at Barnum's American Museum in New York, letting paying crowds gawk at the hole in his head. He drifted through jobs in New Hampshire and Connecticut, then took an unexpected turn south, working as a long-distance stagecoach driver in Valparaiso and Santiago, Chile, for nearly 7 years. Driving a coach through mountain roads required sharp attention, memorized routes, and constant interaction with passengers, skills strikingly close to the ones his accident supposedly destroyed. In 1859, failing health brought him back to the United States to live with his mother in San Francisco. In February 1860, a little over 11 years after the accident, Gage began suffering a series of severe epileptic seizures. He died on May 21st, 1860, at just 36 years old. Gage's story could have ended there, forgotten in a Vermont graveyard. Instead, 5 years after his death, Dr. Harlow convinced the family to exhume the body. Gage's skull, along with the tamping iron that had been buried with him at his own request, was donated to Harvard Medical School, where both objects still sit today in the Warren Anatomical Museum. For over a century, they became one of the most examined specimens in medical history, referenced in psychology textbooks worldwide as proof that the brain's frontal lobes govern personality and social behavior. But for decades, scientists could only guess exactly which parts of Gage's brain the rod had destroyed, working from measurements, damage to the skull, and secondhand 19th century medical notes. The real answer would not arrive until the age of computed tomography, more than 130 years after the accident. In 1994, neuroscientist Hannah DeMacio used CT scans of Gage's actual skull to digitally reconstruct the likely path of the rod through his brain, and later teams used diffusion tractography to map the damage in far greater detail. The rod had obliterated parts of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region now known to be critical for decision-making, planning, and regulating emotional and social behavior. A 2012 study went further, showing the injury also severed roughly 11% of the white matter connecting that region to the rest of the brain, essentially cutting communication lines rather than just destroying tissue. This turned Gage into a founding case study for an entire modern field, social neuroscience, the study of how physical brain structure shapes empathy, impulse control, and identity itself. A random construction accident in rural Vermont had accidentally mapped one of the most important circuits in the human brain. Here is the final twist. In the 2000s, historian Malcolm McMillan dug through original records and found that the wild, uncontrollable version of Gage taught in textbooks was likely exaggerated, based on secondhand exaggeration decades after Harlow's original, more modest notes. Gage's ability to hold a demanding stagecoach job for 7 years suggests his brain adapted far more than the legend admits. An early hint of neuroplasticity nobody had a name for in 1860. So the deepest lesson of Phineas Gage isn't just that damage to the brain can destroy who you are. It's that identity can also survive, rebuild, and quietly recover in ways 19th century science never imagined possible. Somewhere in a glass case at Harvard, a rusted iron rod and a cracked skull are still rewriting what we think a mind actually is. Subscribe for more stories like this.